Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, December 3rd. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Big Ten championship game against Indiana in 3 days, the game against Michigan in 360 days. On today's show, we're welcoming in our X's and O's guru, Ross Fulton, to break down the Ohio State offense against Michigan. And when Ross is on the show, we're sponsored by Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. All right, Ross, this is going to be an overwhelmingly positive show, but we're going to start with some of the, there's a little bit of iffy stuff early, especially early in the game. We're going to start with what is maybe the most unwelcome new Ohio State tradition in the Michigan game. Got to get out there, throw that interception on the first drive. It's tradition. I don't know what to tell you. What happened? What happened here? I mean, Julian Sayin said after the game what happened, but it sounds like he was expecting one thing and got another.
Yeah, exactly. I guess maybe the good news was they got it out of the way even earlier this go around, so it helped them recover. But I saw he and Ryan Day, after the game said he was expecting cover one, and what it was actually is what Michigan spent most of the game playing against Ohio State, which is particularly when you had Jeremiah Smith to the boundary as a single receiver. We talked about this before the game. It's quarter, half. So they'd play cover two to Smith and then cover four to the field. This opened up a lot of opportunities for Ohio State that they exploited that they haven't in the past, so we'll get to. But for this one, they did, I guess, fool saying because they're showing single high pre-snap Ohio State motions out to trips. The other thing I would note, we talked about before the game, and this will again come into play with some of these later clips, is 12 personnel from Ohio State. Michigan did in fact respond with their base 3-4 or 5-2, if you will. And Ohio State then spread out their tight ends just like USC did, and Ohio State did successfully here, as we'll show. But so they run this sort of you got the cover one. I'm assuming Sayin's reading this right. Like, so if you got man, he's going to throw that go ball or fade ball to Smith. Zone, he's going to work to the spacing side, to the trip side. So Michigan fooled them, obviously dropped back. Unfortunate because Colonel Tate's sitting there wide open on that spacing concept. But fortunately Ohio State will come back around to taking advantage of Colonel Tate to the cover four side opposite Smith. But bad start, as I'm sure many people out there, my phone was exploding of here we go again. And I think my dad and I then said to each other simultaneously, it couldn't have got started worse. It's only 6-0. So plenty of time to recover.
Yeah, definitely plenty of time to recover. And I was talking to one of the local TV folks on the sideline and said, this game starts when someone scores a touchdown. Like it was kind of messy at the beginning for both teams, and it was a bunch of field goals. And when Ohio State had the ball, they're down 6-0. They go right down the field. Okay, here they go. They're going to punch it in, and then they didn't punch it in, and they really struggled in the red zone quite a bit, and especially sort of in the close red zone. And they had the one throw to Jeremiah Smith where they threw the fade, and they got one-on-one coverage, and Sayin just kind of overthrew it, and then they really didn't go back to that. I kept waiting for them to go back to it because it feels like if you're not able to just pound the ball in, just win man on man, and just pound the ball in at the goal line, it feels like that's a play that is worth exploring more. I mean, want to get your thoughts on that, and then we'll take a look at some of the stuff that was not working in the goal line for them.
Yeah, I remember watching live thinking to myself, I'd really like to see him throw it here on first down. And they did. And obviously, it was, I think, a little off target, a little behind Smith. I would have liked to have seen them go back to that and be more consistent. I will say that they have tried that several times this year and it really not been very successful, which seemed like an easy single coverage throw to Smith. For as accurate as Julian Sayin's been, he's been off on a couple of those, but it seems like, just because you did it one time and it didn't work, you could certainly go back to it. I would say more generally, we've talked about this, it's always just going to be difficult down in the goal line, low red zone without the quarterback run threat. You're getting under center. We've showed like in clips and we'll show in this one, like they can always outnumber them. I'd say in addition to the fade to Smith, I'd also like to see them probably go a little bit earlier to like the heavy play action bootleg. Like I do think that was there to Jelani Thurman on that fourth down where Bennett Christian, had the false start. And I would contrast that with the third down earlier on this drive, or it was 3rd and 2, the first sort of short yardage of the game for Ohio State. They went right away to a bootleg to Will Kazmarek for the first down. And so I thought that was a good call in that situation because Michigan was just really, aggressively plugging their linebackers against this stuff. And so, we see this one is under center I. They do send Christian out in motion. They're trying to draw, the safety out of the box to the play side. Like they do keep trying different things. We obviously saw the one play where they had Caden McDonald as a lead fullback that was, I guess you'd say, mere inches from a touchdown. But these are sort of the downsides. Like everyone, Michigan's in this odd front. They have Jason Barnum sort of over stacked behind the nose guard. And so you're just really hard to get any sort of double teams, let alone to get to. They have like this kind of double stack, right, where they have Barnum and then they have Rolder right behind them. And it's just hard. Like Nate Roberts, in theory, should be picking up Rolder, but like he's not a natural fullback. Like we showed this a few times this year when they try to run this lead stretch and like he has to see the hole as well, right? And, I think there's technical things like you'd like to see guys get a little lower. I mean, I think CJ Donaldson's been better about getting lower, but like on that Caden McDonald one, I'd still think like a little bit lower pad level. He probably gets that extra inch and scores. But I just think, again, I don't think it's like a dire situation for them, but I do think it's going to require them like to continue to use the creativity. And as I said, like I would not be shy about throwing it multiple times to Jeremiah Smith in that situation, or using, as I said, play action earlier. Obviously, the sneaking was very effective. Other places in the short yardage is just even more difficult at the goal line for the reasons we saw. So it's going to just continue to sort of be a grind a little bit for them. But the good news was, as we'll show later, they threw it really well when they got down there, and so that when they spread it out, so that's also a possibility.
And we are going to shift to the pass game right now. We're not going to start in the red zone, but we'll get there. So get there shortly, just as Ohio State tended to once they got things rolling on offense. One thing they were very effective in was just converting third downs. It was kind of 3rd and medium, 3rd and long, and it just kind of consistently looked like, yeah, no problem, it's fine. 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, yeah, fine, not a big deal. And they used some concepts that we have seen before to do that, including this next one.
Yeah, I mean, the good news was the plan on the Sayin interception was sound against what Michigan was doing, because they went right back to it. And they had a couple, as you said, like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 back to back, where again, Michigan, like very consistently, like same plan for the most part that Michigan's used the last few years against Ohio State, right? Running cover 2 to the boundary, trying to get a double on Smith, cover 4 to the field. They're getting like really deep linebacker drops, like trying to get as many bodies in the way as possible of like the deeper wide receivers. The good news for Ohio State is like the way they are designed. In the past with Michigan, it's been sort of like their number one guy was the X, like where Smith is, and your number 2 is the slot guy, right? And now they have like 2. They're much more like 2 outside wide receiver threats, and so they were able to really take advantage of this like soft cover 4 with Carnell Tate. Like after a month, you almost kind of forget how good Carnell Tate is and like what a difference he makes on these kind of routes, because he's just really good at finding space. So they just kept hitting him with these sort of, spacing routes, curl routes. Tate, I don't show it, but like there's a few times where Ohio State, like we talked about, like ran those on first down, like the glance RPOs or I should say the free access RPOs where Tate runs a hitch. Like they got to 2nd and 3 before the Tate touchdown by, that free access throw to him. So taking advantage of like the Michigan's desire to push the coverage back, and like, we'll talk about here on the other next time that, and it also helps that Julian Sayin's like happy to take those underneath throws. Like we've talked about that this year, like the pluses and minuses of that, but like he really keeps the chains moving. And so on 3rd down, the ball's out and he's getting them to the sticks. But so like, Day sort of alluded to it at the press conference, and I sort of agree. Like, I mean, Ohio State could have probably thrown this stuff all day if the weather had allowed them to do so. It just, you get a lead, and you would know better than me, but it got, pretty dicey. So I think that given that, it's sort of like I'd say big picture though, like they sort of finally conquered this Michigan split safety game plan against Ohio State and a lot of times like just kind of using Jeremiah Smith to eat up two Michigan defenders, which kind of expect, I guess, with Smith, barely practicing, as Day said after the game last week, and just working the opposite side of the field where there's a lot more space.
Yeah, and one of the results of not using Jeremiah Smith a ton and just kind of letting Michigan throw a couple guys at him and work on the other side of the field was Bo Jackson had more receiving yards than Jeremiah Smith in the game. He probably could have gotten pretty good odds on that. But Bo Jackson, as a just individual in terms of total offense, outgained Michigan 166 to 163 all by himself, including 49 yards receiving. This next one is his long reception of the day. And boy, when you add him into the mix, you already got Jeremiah Smith, you already got Tate, you got Brandon Ennis, you got Max Clare, and then you throw in Bo Jackson as a potential impact guy in the pass game. That feels almost like overkill.
Yeah, and we talked about, last week before the game that Jackson could have a big role in the pass game because of this Michigan strategy. And so, again, same coverage, cover 6 here again. So we're attacking the cover 4 side of the field, opposite Smith, right? And they're just using sail concept. So we've talked about this a lot. Outside receiver here, Tate's going to run a deep go route. Brandon Ennis is going to run that like deep out. And then you have the flat route. They run that off of heavy play action here. And so, Jackson is getting the fake and then running to the flat. And obviously, like Michigan, one thing they did a lot, particularly with this kind of action or, run threat, is they wanted to plug the linebacker down. That's another thing they've done a lot against Ohio State these past couple of years. You're basically sort of like building a bear front, for lack of a better term. Like you're using that linebacker, you're attacking an interior gap. And so you're trying to gap everything out again to eliminate double team. So you see Jimmy Rolder here do that. And then he tries to drop back in coverage, but it's too late. But, Michigan's carrying all the routes here. So that just leaves Jackson underneath for a big gain run after the catch. And again, like another example of like saying is the strategy that Michigan's used in recent seasons, it just works less well against Sand as a quarterback because he is perfectly happy to take these throws and like keep the offense moving down the field. And so like, if you want to gain all this depth and carry routes vertically and double Smith, like he'll just take what's underneath, whether it's a couple times to Jackson, he had that like check down to Claire that kept the chains moving. So obviously some big time throws down the field from Sand. I don't use here, but maybe his best one is probably that seam route to Kazmarek. It was also a great catch by him, the guy you don't really expect to have that vertical threat, but he's just happy to keep the offense moving. And so that really cut into Michigan's strategy as well.
All right, the next one I thought was one of the gutsier calls from Ryan Day all day. This was the Jeremiah Smith touchdown, which was on 4th and 5. I think that kind of got lost in the whole kerfluffle about possession or non-possession or whatever. Was he juggling it as he crossed the goal line? That kind of overshadowed the fact that was a 4th and 5 from 35. And he, you're kind of in no man's land. You're not going to punt there, and it's probably too far for a field goal. But that was also, it felt like they were trying to set up a 4-down territory thing. They had 5 yards on first down and then got stopped on a run for no gain on second down, got stopped on a run for no yards on third down. So then it turns into 4th and 5, and you're kind of in no man's land. But that was, I thought, that was a gutsy call from Ryan Day and a really nice throw by Julian Sand.
Yeah, I think if you look back in previous seasons, right, we've talked about like where sort of Michigan has been a step ahead of them in terms of X's and O's choices in the games. And I think this year was really the first time, or, I guess it's easy to say after you win, but you really can point to some situations where like Day used what Michigan and Wink Martindale wants to do against them. And so this is a good example, right? Like it's 4th and 5. And we talked about how Martindale automatically responds to multiple tight ends with his base front, right? And so Ohio State's in 13 personnel on 4th and 5, right? So
it's kind of you would assume it's a passing situation, but you got three tight ends and Michigan responds with their base 3-4. The other thing is, so by doing that, they got Michigan out of that cover 2 bracket of Smith, right? So you've got your base front end here against 13, and so they call cover 3. And so that gets you the one-on-one matchup on the outside. Obviously, a great move by Jeremiah Smith. Max Clare was also wide open to the opposite side. So Michigan was just pretty lost. And so great throw and catch. The other thing before I forget is all these examples is like how good the pass protection was. Like Michigan, we talked about before the game, how aggressive would Martindale be? Like obviously he's known as a blitz heavy guy, but as we discussed, Michigan has not been very successful blitzing this year. Like they've just left themselves pretty vulnerable. And I wouldn't say there was a ton of pressure being brought. Again, like he was copying a page from last year's playbook where they just played a lot of these split safety coverages. But even so, like, there was, Michigan's has some, threats up front as pass rushers. And like just here as in the previous examples, like, I thought particularly like the defensive or the offensive tackles handled those defensive ends really well. You get like the 4-on-1 half slide here. They use a lot of that, 4 guys to one side and the offensive tackle big on big to the other. Obviously they're helping out with a chip here, but a lot of times there's just 5-man or 6-man protections. And, Julian Sane was hardly touched other than I think, like on naked bootlegs where they're leaving someone unblocked. So that obviously made it a lot easier to throw the football as well before the weather set in.
Speaking of great blocking that makes it easy to throw the football, we got to talk about Max Clare and his what? No, I'm just running a route. What? No, I'm running a route in the end zone. What? This is the Brandon Inniss touchdown. And this is certainly another way you could go in terms of getting the ball in the end zone from the low red zone.
Yeah, exactly. This is another great concept. And actually, Ohio State ran this twice on the same drive, right? So we're just talking about like those third and medium pickup opportunities. And so they ran this same exact concept in the middle of the field. It was against cover 6. Here, this is more like a red 2 or even like 2-man. So you got 2 deep safeties and man underneath. And so this is just a great job getting a free release, right? So you've got this yo-yo motion to stack the wide receivers. And then this is a knife concept. So knife is basically like dagger is a concept like we run it one guy deep and have a dig come underneath him. Knife is just like a shorter version of that. So Claire's like running vertically and Inniss is kind of running like a square in behind it, right? But like, Claire's allowed again to release on his route. And so that stack frees Inniss up for the touchdown again, saying, great delivery here. I think, another great job of pass protection by Daniels. But I agree. I mean, I think that to the extent that like, this is at the 3-yard line, they obviously it was 3rd down, so they had to throw here. But I do think there's probably some opportunities out there for, just using, I wouldn't say your base offense, but spreading things out and, throwing the football.
So the next pass play we're going to be talking about, the last pass play we're going to be talking about is that long touchdown to Carnell Tate. And this is one where you could sort of pick apart some areas where Ohio State was probably going to be able to find some opportunities in the secondary. And then once Michigan started getting into their depth in the secondary, that was really true. And this is one, this ended up, Julian Sane said after the game, boy, the ball was up there a while. It felt like it was up there for quite a while, but Carnell Tate was very extremely open on this one.
Yeah, and if there are things on this play that the Michigan defense does wrong. Cody Alexander had a thread on X discussing that, and so highly recommend that if you're interested. But and I'll go through it. But I do think there's things that Ohio State did here to get them in this situation. So again, 12 personnel, but they have Max Clare as the receiver to one side, and opposite him they put Smith and Tate to the same side. And then they're going to motion into trips and put Kazmarek in line. And so that obviously forces, when you get trips, you have to adjust compared to 2x2. And so, again, Michigan is in there. They play cover 2 here because now you've got Smith and Tate to the same side of the field. But you need to do a trips check. And so Ohio State basically runs it's essentially like a bomber concept, what they call it. So you have Clare on this deep curl and then Tate running up post opposite. it's kind of similar to the play that Jeremiah Smith scored against Oregon in the Rose Bowl last year on, same concept. And in theory, Michigan's nickel here, Metcalf has to carry Tate down the middle of the field, and then that backside safety should be picking him up, because you see the front side safety, again, like he's widening to Jeremiah Smith, right? And that backside safety, though, like once they don't carry him, the concept is that curl is supposed to hold that backside safety just the way it does. And that opens up Tate for a wide open throw. So again, like doing things to mess, taking advantage of either using Smith to knowing that you're dictating how Michigan's going to cover that. Like you're probably going to get quarters opposite that and use concepts against that, or, put them on the same side, mess with Michigan's rules and see how they're able to respond, including with motion. And so, yeah, this was sort of the kill shot they needed, for lack of a better term. As I said, set up by hit the glance route on first down, get in 2nd and 3, and then take your shot.
All right, and we are going to finish things up by going real heavy in the run game, just like Ohio State did on Saturday. First of all, this is the play. This is a really nice run by Bo Jackson in the red zone. Get a couple pullers out in front of him. Luke Montgomery and Max Clare get out in front of him, and they block it nicely. But man, great leg drive here from Bo Jackson as well to get them down. And this ended up setting up that Brandon Inniss touchdown we talked about a minute ago.
Yeah, the one thing that was noticeable throughout the game, again, as I talked about, like Michigan liked to play that base odd front when Ohio State's in 2 tight ends, or insert a linebacker and like create a bear front. If anyone, I guess, is a glutton for punishment and wants to go back, like look at how Michigan did that last year. We talked about in the video. But the difference is this year, like Ohio State was overwhelmingly a zone team at this time last year, and now they're just like they're so gap heavy, and it's just such a better concept against odd fronts for the reason we've talked about, the same reason that teams keep using gap schemes against when Ohio State's in a penny front. And we did discuss, like, a lot of the year, Ohio State had some issues executing, particularly GH counter, where you're pulling the guard and pulling the backside tight end, but like they've really cleaned that stuff up. And so this is just really well executed. Great kick out block by Montgomery, great lead through the hole by Clare. They kick out, lead through, great double teams. You're getting guys downfield. Bo Jackson, as you said, like he's really sort of starting to come into his own in terms of like at the second level, whether making guys miss, most noticeably on that, where he kind of gave you the stop and go, or early in the game a couple of times, but he, really fighting through second level contact. The other thing that was nice about these counters is that Ohio State was pairing them with a lot of different looks on the backside. Like they were running both GH counter and GT counter. They brought in James Peoples a couple of times, and they sort of used him as the now screen threat outside. Here they're running double verticals with Tate and Smith. So that's obviously, Michigan again is in 2 high safeties because they're worried about that vertical threat. So that opens things up at the second level. And so, you just get the more, as we said, that you can get teams in 2 high, the better the run game is going to look. But I think all in all, just like you have to be pretty pleased. They ran counter a bunch. As I said, they also ran power a lot at that last, 20 play drive where you're kicking out with the fullback and leading through with the backside guard, both really successful. So we'll get into that drive here in a second, but like just you see the benefits now of the run game diversity coming through. I think there were some growing pains this year in terms of the number of concepts, young running backs. But I do think, there were caveats going into this game about, was the run game, was it fool's gold in terms of improvements because of the level of competition? But I think, this game sort of stamped that like there have been improvements, and it's just like in terms of both execution and then, the younger running backs, Jackson in particular, just like really getting comfortable, and that's leading to him being more explosive at the second level.
And they were very effective running the ball. And yeah, a 20 play drive in the snow for almost 12 minutes. That felt like Ryan Day. That had to be about the most satisfying thing that Ryan Day has experienced over the last year or so, outside of maybe winning the national championship, possibly. But other than that, yeah, as he said after the game, well, he didn't finish it with a touchdown, but otherwise that might have been up there in terms of his favorite moments in football. And this is just one of these plays. This is C.J. Donaldson. I mean, they really got everyone involved by the time things were done, but this is one from C.J. Donaldson.
Yeah, so this is Weinbach. So I just, again, emphasize sort of the diversity on that drive. So they ran Weinbach several times. As I said, they ran counter, they ran stretch, they ran power, they ran split zone, to the split, like we showed a couple weeks ago. But what really kind of started off here is Weinbach, and so Weinbach, we showed before, is sort of everyone's down blocking, and then you're kind of counter run back, and you've got the wide receiver here. And so again, using what Michigan wants to do in terms of playing cover 6, so you're playing cover 2 to the boundary, and that means the corner is the force support player. And so they keep running Weinbach to the boundary and have David Adolph basically serve as the lead blocker and dig out that cover 2 corner for big gains and just running downhill at them at Michigan. The other thing I would note, though, as the game went on, because of Ohio State's passing game success, Martindale stopped playing a lot of times that base front, even against 12 personnel, and played much more like a nickel even front. And so that further helped on this drive, So again, using the passing game to set up the run game here. I do think that drive, I know Day said, without a touchdown, it doesn't go down in his all-time. I do think that was where the weather sort of came into effect. I think he talked about they basically on that third down, they tried to throw sort of a flat route off a snag to the Roberts as the fullback. I think they're being pretty conservative. They did take the one shot down the field on that drive to Tate, but as I said, it started sort of the elements began working against them. So had to be pretty satisfying just in terms of the execution though. Running downhill, much better on double teams, getting to the second level.
Yeah, as you said, I was there on Saturday out in the elements. It was not ideal football weather. Great news, the forecast for Saturday night in Indianapolis, 70, no wind, no precipitation. Should be a pretty perfect, fast, dry track for both the Buckeyes and the Hoosiers. And these are two teams. These are teams that are not only 1-2 in the nation in the polls, 1-2 in the nation in SP+. They are 1-2 in the nation in defensive SP+ as well. This is going to be a challenging Indiana defense for the Buckeyes. I just want to get some sort of overall thoughts from you on them. Tony Yurdeman and I have rewatched, I think, 4 games at this point, and my overall takeaway is the defensive line is pretty good. The linebackers are really good. D'Angelo Pons is a very good corner, but he's 5'9". I'd be interested if that's something you think they might explore with the taller wide receivers. And then the other corner, Jamari Sharp, maybe there's some opportunity there for Ohio State in the pass game. Just want to get your thoughts on the Hoosier defense.
Yeah, so I guess I'd say big picture. While Michigan I thought was fairly static in terms of what they were doing up front, Indiana will stunt and move a ton. They are going to, loop, slant. They're a 4 down front, but they will get in an odd, tight front. They did that a lot against Ohio State last year. Again, that'll be an interesting one because, as we said, Ohio State was a very heavy zone team last year, so that makes a lot more sense. That is less good against gap runs, so we'll see how they handle that. Brian Hayes, their defense coordinator, though, they're heavy cover 3 on early downs, and last year, Ohio State again, those we were talking about the free access kind of hitch routes, hit some of those against Indiana. Really, probably could have done it more, and they really need to do that again to Tate and Smith on early downs on Saturday. Because then if what Indiana wants to do is get you in passing downs, because then he likes to use a lot of simulated pressures and fire zones, play kind of 2 deep, 4 under, bring guys from different places, plug the linebacker, try to mess with your protections. So he was pretty aggressive against Ohio State last year, particularly when he thought Ohio State was going to run the ball. So I think, to sound like a broken record maybe, but I think passing on early downs and using the pass to set up the running will also benefit Ohio State on Saturday.
All right. Well, we will have much more about that Ohio State-Indiana game coming up all week long at BuckeyeHuddle.com and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. We'll also be back a little later on in the week to talk about the Ohio State defense and what they did against Michigan and what that might mean against the Indiana offense, which is also pretty good. We'll have that, and we'll have much more coverage coming up all week long at BuckeyeHuddle.com and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors, Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.